You know those little number settings that you get on your shaver? The ones where you think, oh, I'll set it to 10. That must mean 10 millimeters. Well, no, apparently that's not what it means. That's not what that means. Who knows what those numbers mean? But by the time I noticed, the damage had already been done and I had to even it out. I look like a baby. I have absolute baby face. I know it's on the internet for everyone to see. So, laugh it up in the comments. I'm growing it straight back. Let's just get on with the video. I'm genuinely very angry. The atom. That teensy tiny little ball of abstraction that quite literally makes up everything and everyone in the observable and unobservable universe. When humanity finally figured out how to harness this primal force of nature, it caused an irreversible leap in technological progress. At the cost of opening Pandora's box and potentially pushing us closer to oblivion. As such, it shouldn't be surprising that its process and study are a source of curiosity to many, from the murky depths of government agencies that birthed its breakthroughs to, as we will discuss today, a well-intentioned teenager who also tried to harness the power of the atom from his shed. David Hahn, the nuclear Boy Scout. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. There is no sponsor today. Actually, technically there is. It's me. Go and subscribe to my second channel. Also, go and subscribe to the TISM podcast that I do every week for only 40 minutes due to time constraints. It will get better, trust me. I promise. But anyway, I don't shout myself out enough, so go down below and go to all my socials and subscribe to all of the links down there, you know, things like my Patreon. Things like that. I need to start doing things like showing patrons at the end of videos and stuff like that. But anyway, yes, the sponsor today is me. So go and subscribe to my second channel, go subscribe to the TISM podcast, and go subscribe to all of the other stuff that's down in the description. Enjoy the video. We start on October the 30th, 1976, in the town of Royal Oak, Michigan, a sleepy suburb in the famously peaceful and enriched city of Detroit, where our man of the hour has just spawned in as David Charles Hahn. His father Ken was a mechanical engineer by trade, and his mother Patty was a schizophrenic alcoholic. Yes, really. Of course, due to his mother's chosen occupation, she had to be moved to a mental hospital when the boy was only 4 years old. By the time he was 9, David's parents had separated, with sole custody going to Ken. Of course, despite the rather tragic beginning to this story, it seemed like David was on the up and up, as alongside gaining a substantially less volatile home to inhabit, he was now having his bright mind and curious soul nurtured by his family. Of particular importance is his step-grandfather, giving the lad the Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments. But because it was written in the 50s, it was not only outdated in terms of its knowledge, but also of health and safety. Using actual isotopes as opposed to those shitey wee baking soda volcano experiments that you always see. The natural conclusion to this newfound fixation on chemical processes, paired with the fact that our David was a young boy, meant that he had a bit of a penchant to make model rockets and fireworks. Which is based. Of course, because this is a wholesome video about a nuclear glowy and not a federal one, this never went anywhere malicious. I mean, he funded his little space program by mowing people's lawns, for God's sake. That is peak Americana. Despite that, his domestic V2 program was becoming a little bit of a household hazard. This, paired with an apparently poor academic performance in school, resulted in David being encouraged to join the Boy Scouts, which for the non-American audiences is sort of like the British Cadets, but a lot less cool and a lot more rapier. This also had the added benefit of keeping David out of the house, because apparently Ken wasn't that involved in the boy's life, and frankly, didn't seem that interested in him, only spending time with him when he was on scout trips. Regardless, the Boy Scouts were a good spot for David to end up, with the camaraderie and discipline of the group focusing the lad's natural curiosity and excess energy into being a more productive force for good. However, as we will come to see, this entry had resulted in some unforeseen consequences. Of course, despite this entry into the Boy Scouts, our brainy boy Goy was still bedazzled by the arcane nature of chemical processes. That is to say, he was still autistically fixated on chemistry. His early experiments were innocent and amateurish, but still resulted in unforeseen outcomes. Like one time where he apparently turned his hair green or created a gas that knocked him out cold. Or, explosions. Yeah, he apparently made explosions on a couple of occasions, using chemical reactions that were sourced by himself, a literal child. That's not surprising, seeing as how chemistry just does that shit, but still, it's a showcase of David's recklessness and lack of regard for personal safety. But it still is quite funny. He just comes walking into the house with his eyebrows missing and he says, "Dad, you know how the shed in the back garden, it's gone." You see, I very strongly suspect that David is in fact autistic. You need only dwell upon the fact that he tried to go right out of his way to collect every single element on the periodic table. Like a Pokedex, but instead of collecting Pikachus and Pidgeys, it was polonium and plutonium. And yes, there is a reason why I chose those two specific elements. Google them, they are what we call Easter eggs. But apparently this is quite a common hobby, but that will not stop me from positing that this boy was riddled with autism. Of course, this strange hobby of his ended up impressing his fellow scouts, as he was showcasing conviction and a solid work ethic in his nerd hobbies. As such, after making a model nuclear reactor out of bottles, he was given the Nuclear Merit Badge, because apparently that's a fucking thing in the Boy Scouts. As there is indeed merit involved with a presumed teenager handling fissile material. Regardless, this seemed to inspire something deep inside David, as now he wanted to go all in on atomancy. He truly wanted to become a shadow wizard. Apparently, David's nickname in the Boy Scouts was unironically Glow Boy, on account of his fixation on radiation. That's not a joke, by the way. That piece of information that I just gave you is completely real. Thus, at 15 years old, David decided to make himself a breeder reactor. And before any of you degenerate gooners in the comments start piping up with your edgy, inane, and painfully unfunny porno babble, no, it's not that kind of breeder, you make me very uncomfortable, please stop. So, what is a breeder reactor? Well, it is a nuclear reactor that produces more fissile material than it consumes. And before you get all excited at the supposed defiance of the laws of entropy, it doesn't really work like that. I'm not getting into the details of it because it makes my smooth aerodynamic head hurt. What you should be pondering is this. Where is David getting the fuel from? Surely there would be very tight regulations on such hazardous materials. Well, there is now, but back then it was surprisingly very easy to get a hold of all kinds of magic stones. Well, David channeled his inner gypsy and started collecting trinkets. What sort of trinkets? Well, things like old clocks, gun sights, gas mantles, and smoke detectors. All of these seemingly innocuous items and furniture actually had trace amounts of fissile material, like the glow-in-the-dark paint on radium dials and inside radium girls, but that's a story for another time, or the presence of americium in smoke detectors, used for its ability to radiate through smoke and dust particles. Fun fact, a lot of modern smoke detectors still house and use this material. Just something to think about whenever it chops at you because you are very lazy and remarkably well seasoned. A fun fact is that alongside procuring fuel, David was also procuring knowledge. Not only through scouring books that are way above my reading comprehension, but also through good old-fashioned social engineering. For example, David had a habit of inquiring for information through writing letters to all sorts of organisations and individuals in the field of atomics, like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, for which David would roll a Nat 20 in deception by claiming to be a college lecturer and signing his name as Professor David Hahn, which they actually bought hook, line and sinker. Remember, this is a 15-year-old boy doing all of this shit. His handwriting alone must have been a major red flag, yet these plutonium-dense atom chimps were just oh so happy to divulge to him how nuclear reactors work. Back on topic, with the fuel secured, David now just needed a reactor for it to react inside of. Easy peasy. He just procured and hollowed out a massive block of lead. And he made thorium from lithium via $1,000 worth of batteries. I know, that's one hell of a budget for a 15-year-old boy. He must have been an absolute fucking menace at mowing those lawns. Now, it should not come as a shock to any of you to find out that his DIY breeder reactor wasn't exactly of high yield or quality. As such, during his initial trial fission runs, the thing started leaking radiation like a sieve, at over 1,000 times the ambient level. David shit himself and started dismantling it, but the damage was already done, as apparently Geiger counters multiple houses away were absolutely screaming, with everything in that vicinity now completely contaminated with radiation, and David being essentially hotboxed with cancer. But it only gets worse for Dave, as upon finding out that his reactor actually reacts, he panicked and dismantled it, sticking the thing in the boot of his car and driving hell for leather to dispose of it a safe distance from his neighbourhood. And through sheer chance, the police pulled him over, and they asked to search his car, to which David then replied, "My trunk is radioactive." Now, there are very few things that will make police officers absolutely shit themselves. Finding a body in the trunk, well, that's just another Tuesday. However, finding fissile material, well, that will make every single federal agency from California to Maine collectively fucking shit themselves. There are very, very few things that all of the feds will instantly collaborate on and throw every single resource they have at. And a civilian being in possession of fissile material on US soil is one of those things. Upon validating the veracity of his claim, the feds then sent in the EPA to swarm his house. As such, the public finally came face to face with David Hahn's nuclear shed, his chemical crack den, his atomic outhouse, his radio shack. Upon the arrival of hazmated up glowies circling and gnawing at the house like vultures, picking and pilfering through the dingy shed, naturally panic began to set in as they were being rather aggressive with their state-mandated looting. Why? Well, David didn't exactly fit the profile of a nuclear scientist. As such, the police thought instead that our teenage Boy Scout was in fact a terrorist who had been building a dirty bomb. Yes, I am being completely serious. They thought that David was about to 10-penny tower the entire cul-de-sac with a fucking shed nuke. In total, the damages and cleanup came to $75,000, with David's shed being dismantled piece by piece, stuck into barrels, and then shipped off to be dumped in a nuclear waste site in Utah. But fuck all that noise, what happened to David? Well, he, funnily enough, wasn't actually charged with anything. Mostly due to his age, but also the fact that technically he broke no laws, as all laws pertaining to fissile materials and the like were designed with only institutions and corporations in mind, not individuals. But of course, that loophole has obviously since been closed. Regardless, what were David's thoughts on this particular event? Well, to put it very bluntly, he doesn't regret it. That's all that really needs to be said. After surviving the heat that he just went through, he understandably kept his head out of the spotlight, instead focusing on finishing off his studies and trying to get his life back on track. Despite that, however, depression had set in. Alongside being a metaphorical Icarus and getting too close to the mighty sun, a breakup and his mother's suicide in 1996, all of that really plunged him into the proverbial abyss. But, like with most things, they will pass with time. However, David marched on, initially being encouraged to attend Macomb Community College for a metallurgy programme. But it turns out, however, that mere metallurgy makes my man's mind melt. With boredom, as he apparently skipped classes constantly. But shortly after this, David joined the Navy. That's right, fellas, our glib, glowy goon is now a seaman. And because he seemingly has divine providence when it comes to anything to do with fishing, he was naturally stationed on the USS Enterprise, which for context, alongside having the funny Star Trek name, had 8 AW2 nuclear reactors on board. So, David was spoiled for choice in nuclear reactions to react to reactively. Though, of course, nothing is forever, and after his 4-year contract had expired, he could look back on his time on the Enterprise with glee, as he got himself a good job as an interior communications specialist, and more importantly, the rank of Petty Officer 3rd Class, which for those vets of you who may be wondering, yes, he was part of the E4 Mafia. Of course, he left that life behind and he was out of the game, so where did he end up next? Why, the Marines, of course, though out of the E4 Mafia and back down to a mere E3, no, not that one, he still managed to climb his way back up to Lance Corporal, before getting honourably discharged on medical grounds after coming home from Japan. Of course, with all of these glowy puns littered throughout the video, we have to have them properly show up at least once. To which we get into the fact that in April of 2007, the FBI had a case against the now veteran David. Why? What was the case about? Well, the FBI got tipped off that our cheeky wee seaman was up to his old shenanigans again. That he was in possession of a neutron source that he supposedly had hidden inside of his freezer. So, in a comical turn of events, the FBI decided to just phone David and ask him directly if he had fissile material inside of his fridge. You know, as one does. Shockingly, David denied this line of questioning. Dwelling upon his response, the feds decided that though he probably wasn't a domestic terrorist, he still warrants getting a little bit more involved in a debriefing. As such, an in-person interview commenced. The interview shone a light on some of the happenings of David's life post-Navy, like how he had decided that his life was in fact interesting enough to write a book on it. And that not only was this book subject to promotion efforts via leaflets that David would actively hand out, but that it is also getting a film made about it. Golly, our glow guy is going to shine bright like a neutron star, though not everything was on the up and up for David as it turns out, as he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic just like his mother. Shocking, I know, someone who was under scrutiny from a government agency turns out to be an intelligent and eccentric nutcase. I wonder what the FBI wanted with him. Regardless, he didn't end up doing anything too exciting according to this interview, though an unnamed individual did come forward with details pertaining to David's personal life. Nothing very exciting, just stealing tyres and stuff. Junky behaviour, but we're not there yet. A separate individual was then approached by the feds for an interview, and my oh my did they have tea to spill about our jabbering jarhead. Things like cocaine benders, prostitutes, and his aversion to government-prescribed soul death pills in the form of medication for his supposed paranoid schizophrenia. Apparently, when confronted about his refusal to take his taxpayer poison, David claimed that there were people with the ability to shock my genitals with their minds. What the hell? Why would they do that? That is so fucked up. Psychic CBT on a well-to-do veteran is immoral. And I disavow it. The shadow people wouldn't want that after all. Now, to round off this second whistleblower's interview, it also came to light that there was cause to believe that David was indeed building a second reactor, which actually wasn't that much cause for concern, except for the fact that he is a fucking head case. And this fear turned out to be justified, because on August the 1st, 2007, David Hahn was charged with larceny in Clinton Township, Michigan, having apparently been on the prowl stealing people's smoke alarms for its precious Americium. It is here that we get the famous mugshot of Dave, looking like a haggard, deflated and spotty Beavis, of Butthead fame, with those notable red spots thought to be related to either heavy drug use or the fact that he has been permanently bombarded with radiation for 24 hours a day for fucking years now. As such, David pleaded guilty, with an issued sentence of 90 days delayed for 6 months whilst he underwent desperately needed medical treatments for both his radiation sickness and his esoteric pattern recognition. Of course, with 2 separate instances of being absolutely zapped with radiation and the incredibly dire mental condition present, it's no surprise that upon being released, David fell down a pit of despair once more. Though this time, he wouldn't quite climb back out, because on September the 27th, 2016, the 39-year-old David Hahn would atomize. No, not literally. His killing blow would be ruled as an accidental overdose, on account of his high blood alcohol levels, as well as the presence of diphenhydramine and fucking fentanyl in his system. Yes, our nuclear whiz kid got Floyded. An absolute tragedy. I know that every single one of us put all of our chips on cancer, but it just goes to show that nothing's ever really certain. So, David Hahn has passed away. And where does that leave us now? Well, despite the abrupt end to our hero's journey, we can still gaze back upon his legacy, which, despite the darker-toned epilogue, has overall been quite positive. I mean, the guy was an inspiration to many, and not just for his ballsiness. His experiments actually inspired the likes of nuclear whiz kid Young Sheldon, alongside another whiz kid and Young Sheldon lookalike, Taylor Wilson, who I'd like to think would still be toiling in the fields of Swabia if not for the inspiring actions of David Hahn. I mean, look at that peasant physiognomy, it's fucking stark. Tangent aside, David was a man who knew his passions well and pursued them relentlessly, even when his own health and well-being was on the line. He just fucking went for it when he probably shouldn't have. And for obvious reasons, I can't condone that. However, I can at least respect it.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody to subscribe.